Certainly. Here's the first chapter of your powerful story, crafted to be long, engaging, suspenseful, and filled with twists, all starting with a gripping scene and intense atmosphere. I'll keep the language simple but impactful, and the story will flow seamlessly into the next chapters, each continuing from the previous ending. Chapter 1. The Edge of the Flood. There I was, standing at the very edge of what used to be a mountain dam, now just a roaring, unstoppable flood. It was tearing through the new homes the HOA had illegally built on my land, homes that were never meant to be there. The water was black and furious, crashing over the remains of the dam like a beast unleashed. Freeze frame. That's me. Right there, looking into the chaos, heart pounding, hands clenched. You're probably wondering how I got to this point, how I ended up flooding an entire suburban development, and why no one could stop me. Well, it all started with them. The people who thought they could steal what my grandfather left me. When my grandfather died, I never imagined his greatest gift would turn into a battlefield. He left me a piece of the old country, wide open fields, dense woods, and a mountain dam he had built himself. Not just any dam, but a fortress of stone, sweat, and stubbornness. It was a legacy of survival, built after surviving the worst flood our area had ever seen. My grandfather's dam wasn't just a barrier. It was a testament to resilience, a shield against chaos. The will was clear. This land, these waters, everything that touched the soil, belonged to me. No strings, no conditions. I lived quietly, working in town, fixing fences, walking the dam's crest, watching the seasons turn. But peace didn't last long. It started with a letter, crisp white paper embossed with gold, the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association. I frowned. I wasn't part of any HOA. My land sat outside town limits, protected by decades of zoning battles, or so I thought. The letter politely explained that I was now part of their community review, whatever that meant, and that my land was included in their expansion plans. I attended the next town meeting, curious. What I saw made my stomach drop. There, on a big screen, was a map, bright colors, heavy blue ink, and my land folded into their development zone like it had never belonged to anyone. I stood up, furious, demanding answers. That's when I met Karen Langford. She was smiling, all teeth and fake charm, claiming it was a clerical error, a simple mistake that would be corrected soon enough. I saw through her. I knew it was more than that. I left the meeting with a bad feeling gnawing at my gut. Weeks passed. Surveyors came without warning, staking neon flags across my fields. They didn't knock or ask, just trampled and marked what they claimed was public land. Then came the heavy machinery, bulldozers, excavators. They carved roads through my grandfather's pasture, poured foundations like they owned the place. I hired a lawyer, a good one, honest and sharp, but even he looked worried when he saw the paperwork. County clerks dodged my calls. Complaints disappeared. Karen's smile grew wider every time I protested. They approved 58 homes, luxury craftsmen, they said, built right on top of my land. I tried everything, legal protests, offers to buy me out, even pleading, but Karen had a way of making me look like the fool. She laughed off my warnings, offered generous buyouts, and dismissed me as a relic of the past. I told her I'd never sell. Ever. That was the moment she and her board turned hostile. They slapped fines on my old truck. Notices appeared on my door. I was being pushed out, piece by piece. The development signs went up, and I realized they didn't just want my land. They wanted to erase it. I called the sheriff. They shrugged. It was a civil matter. No one wanted to take responsibility. I knew I was outmatched. I found out that Karen's HOA was donating heavily to local politicians, bribing officials, and manipulating the system. It was all papered over with smiles and handshake deals. I kept quiet, pretending to accept their progress. I documented everything, every violation, every shady deal, every shortcut they took. I recorded conversations, saved emails, made copies of approvals. I built a case quietly in my grandfather's old workshop, stacking proof like bricks. They thought they'd won. They poured money into infrastructure, ignoring the land's history, ignoring the mountain's power. They laid water lines on unstable ground, built over old flood basins, and rerouted creeks without understanding the mountain's true nature. They thought they could tame the land with concrete and greed. But the mountain was patient. It remembered. One day I saw them gouge into the dam itself, a backhoe, careless and loud, digging into the outer shoulder. Not deep enough to cause immediate collapse, but enough to weaken what had kept the flood at bay for decades. I wanted to scream, to run down and stop them. Instead, I clenched my fists and stayed hidden. Because I understood something. They didn't. They didn't realize they were building their own destruction piece by piece over the bones of my grandfather's work. I let the debris gather, the silt clog the channels, the cracks spread. I stopped patching leaks. I stopped keeping the pressure steady. I let nature do what it always did, find its own way. When the rains came, I watched from my porch, knowing what was coming. I felt the ground tremble beneath me, like a warning, and then it happened. The dam gave way, not with a bang, but a slow, relentless collapse. The earth trembled, then shuddered. Water roared like a beast freed from its cage, tearing down the mountain and flooding everything in its path. I stood at the ridge, watching. The nightmare unfold. Roofs lifted like leaves, homes swallowed by the flood, streets buckling and twisting. Karen's house, that shiny monument to hubris, stood for a moment longer than the others. I saw her inside, screaming into her phone, frozen in the headlights of disaster. The flood consumed her house in moments. The columns snapped like toothpicks. The walls crumbled. She was trapped, helpless. I watched her go under, just like that. It was over. Done. The chaos, the destruction, the reckoning. And I knew even then, I'd laid the trap long ago. I'd warned them, documented everything, and waited. The mountain had spoken. Nature had finally taken back what was hers. No matter what they had signed or built, no matter how loud they shouted or how many lawyers they hired, the land had spoken in the language it knew best: water, pressure, and time. I stayed silent. I stayed patient. I watched the wreckage settle, the weeds reclaim what was lost, and the land begin to heal. Because sometimes the strongest voice isn't shouted, it's the silence that follows the storm. And I knew deep down that the mountain's roar had only just begun. Would you like me to craft the next chapter continuing from here? Certainly. Here's the second chapter, starting immediately from the aftermath of the dam's collapse, diving straight into the action with suspense, powerful language, and twists, without any slow build-up or introduction. The mountain trembled once more, a deep, resonant growl that rattled through the earth beneath my feet. I watched the floodwaters surge down the mountain like a beast unleashed, tearing through everything in their path. The first wave hit the edge of Willow Ridge with brutal force. Homes lifted from their foundations, streets buckled and buckled again, as if the very ground was crying out in pain. I saw Karen's house, that white, proud monument, tilt and then shudder, its columns snapping like twigs tumbling into the chaos. The water swallowed her house whole, leaving behind only a rising wall of muddy foam. I didn't move. I didn't shout. I just stood there, watching the destruction unfold, my heart pounding in my chest. Time seemed to slow as I watched the flood consume what they'd built, what they'd thought could never be touched. But I knew better. I knew the mountain had patience. It had waited for this moment, for their arrogance to crack like the dam's weakened shoulder. And now it was paying them back, bit by bit, drop by drop. Then I saw her, Karen, caught in her house's last moments, her face pressed against the glass, eyes wide with terror. The water was closing in, relentless and cold, and I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and dread. She had mocked me, dismissed my warnings, and now she was paying the price. The house shuddered, groaned, and then, with a terrible cracking sound, it split in half. One side collapsed into the flood, the other tilted backward, as if the earth itself had decided to unseat her from her throne. That's when I realized The flood wasn't done. It was just beginning. The river of chaos spread faster than I could blink, tearing through the new subdivision, swallowing the fancy homes, the manicured lawns, the pride of Willow Ridge. It was a tidal wave of justice, and it was coming for everything they'd stolen, everything they'd built on the bones of my grandfather's land. I felt the rush of water behind me, an enormous, unstoppable force pushing upward, eager to claim what was rightfully its own. The dam had cracked, weakened beyond repair, and now it was crumbling. The water was spilling out like a floodgate broken, rushing downhill with a roar that drowned out every shout, every scream. Somewhere, I could hear sirens, but they sounded distant, faint echoes of a world that still believed it could control nature. I clenched my fists tighter. I knew this wasn't just about revenge, it was about balance, about respect for the land that had survived centuries of storms and floods. And now, the land was taking its vengeance, piece by piece, wave by wave. A sudden surge shoved me back, knocking me off balance. I stumbled, my boots sinking into the muddy ground. Looking up, I saw the dam's remnants, the jagged, fractured scar in the mountainside, still trembling, still weak. I knew it wouldn't hold much longer. The earth was exhausted, the stones and earth tired of fighting, and the water had found its open door. I saw Karen's face again, her scream lost in the roar. Her house, her mansion, her symbol of power, was dissolving into the flood. She had built her empire on lies and greed, and now the mountain was tearing it all apart. It was poetic, beautiful in its brutal honesty. The floodwaters kept rising, surging through the streets, ripping apart everything they touched. I watched as the water swallowed the last of the roads, the fences, the remnants of a world that had thought it could conquer the mountain. And I understood. This wasn't just a flood. It was a reckoning. Somewhere above the chaos, the mountain rumbled again, deeper this time, more deliberate, as if it was breathing out a final warning. The water had already begun to carve new paths, new channels, ways for the land to reclaim what was lost. It was the mountain's silent promise. Nothing stays buried forever. I stayed still, watching the destruction unfold, as if I was waiting for the storm to pass. But deep inside, I knew this was just the beginning. The real storm, the one that would settle the score, was still coming. I could feel it in my bones. The mountain was waking up, and I was ready for what came next. Because some things, some debts, are paid in blood, water, and silence. And I had all three in abundance.